CAPSI podcast series. CAPSI, Building a Culture of Effective Giving and Corporate Social Responsibility.
Hello and welcome to the CAPSI podcast series. We are building a culture for effective giving and corporate social responsibility. We are bringing philanthropy closer to you. I am Bhekinkosi Moyo, the Director of the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, and I'll be your host today. Joining us today is Rachel Kolisi. Rachel is a humanitarian businesswoman, co-founder of the Kolisi Foundation, and the wife to Springbok Captain Siya Kolisi, whom she has the absolute joy and privilege of raising 4 wonderful children with. Rachel, welcome to the series.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
And thank you so much. We are also excited here to have you. We always want to start by wanting to know something about yourself. Please tell us, who is Rachel and what influenced you to be involved in philanthropy?
Yeah, I think I always struggle with that question, who is Rachel? Because my mind goes in 7,000 directions. But I guess in the early stages of mine and Sia's relationship, kind of played with the fact that, Sia's got a platform and it's important for him to use that. And kind of as his platform grew, so did mine coincide. And I really wanted to use it for something that would change. So, one day when I look back on my life and the things that I've achieved and the things that I've done, that there's some kind of impact that I left, and Sia kind of felt the same way. And, even in our early days of dating, I noticed things about him, that he had a really caring heart and really just spent a lot of time seeing other people and acknowledging people, and a lot of people even less fortunate than him, but very similar backgrounds to what he grew up with. And I love that about him. And when we fast forward all the way to the World Cup in 2019, the night before the final, we sat in the hallway of the hotel room. We put our kids to bed, and we sat outside and made a list of the things that we wanted to see change in South Africa and things that we felt just from our personal experiences needed to be addressed. And so we made this list, and we kind of realized we were going to need a vehicle in order to do all these things that we wanted to do. And the vehicle was a foundation. And so that was really the heart of the foundation, was really just 2 people with similar desires to see things change and to see equal opportunities given in South Africa. And I guess that really is where the birth of the foundation was created.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's always a story behind the setting up of foundations, and at times it's to do with what you see in the world. At times it's got to do with your upbringing. Is there anything in your upbringing or that of Sia that you could draw to and say this actually is the probably the force behind you setting up the foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are big believers, and I think, along the journey of the responsibility that we hold, not just in South Africa, but sometimes globally as well, but just the responsibility that we have to learn and to mature and to grow as individuals. We found that we really don't have business meddling in things that we haven't personally experienced and personally know well. So when we were kind of mapping out what we wanted to do with the foundation, our first kind of sessions that we sat deciding what we wanted to address in South Africa came from our own personal experiences. For Sia as a young child, he writes about it in his book and also speaks about it publicly often, about how he often went to bed hungry. And his grandmother would go to other people in the community to either get a maize meal or would take biscuits when she went for tea with some of her friends, and would take that back to the children back at home. And the fact that, that was over 20 years ago, the fact that there's still children living in the same conditions in this day and age and in this year, is a problem for us. And that's, that's where our pillar of food security kind of evolved. And then we've got education and sports development. My access to education and Sia's access to education were almost two completely different worlds. And why is that the case? And that is still the case today, and that's a problem. Of course, Sia's access, being a professional sportsman now, his access to the same opportunities that a lot of children had at Model C schools were completely different. And why was that the case? So that's why then the pillar education and sports development was created. And then, of course, gender-based violence. It's not something that I haven't spoken about my experience of gender-based violence publicly, and I'm still journeying through that. But one day, I'm sure I'll get there. But the statistics tell us that majority of women in South Africa have been abused and are survivors of gender-based violence. And the statistics also tell us that majority of men then are the abusers. And Sia, of course, grew up in an environment and watched his mother be abused by numerous men. He watched his aunt, also be abused by numerous men. And I think there's two conversations that are held there. It's, of course, the woman in the conversation, but then more importantly, the men in the conversation. And I just think that someone at Sia's influence where he is now, this big rugby player where rugby is such a supported sport in our country, he's got such an opportunity to really address the men in the conversation around gender-based violence. And so both my experience and Sia's experience is really the reason why the third pillar of our foundation was created, which is gender-based violence.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, this is one of the pandemics that we don't speak a lot about. We don't even call it a pandemic, the gender-based violence. And I think that as philanthropies, as various institutions, we've got to be very open about it and call it what it is. It is a pandemic. I also see that as a foundation, you are interested in changing the narratives on inequality. And we know how high the levels of inequality are in the country. But from the perspective of your foundation, you obviously see the bigger and broader levels of inequality, but you are also operating within specific communities. And I just want to get a sense on how you are dealing with that within the specific communities that your foundation is targeting.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a massive mission that we're after. And, we haven't set ourselves any small goals at all, that we do believe it's possible, and maybe not in our lifetime, maybe not even in our children's lifetime, but it has to be a conversation. The gap, I think South Africa, if I remember correctly, has the biggest inequality rate, I think, in the world, which is just insane to me, that you can drive down some roads and see multi-million rand houses on one side and almost shacks or, informal settlements on the other side of the road. And that's just crazy to me. So when we talk about changing the narratives of inequality in South Africa, that we address in our three different pillars, we're talking specifically through to the pillars that we are addressing in our foundation. And I just think it's been, we've really positioned ourselves as a foundation that is completely willing to learn and to listen. And I think, I think it's super important that a lot of organizations and people working in different communities, especially communities that you didn't grow up in and don't fully understand, we spend a lot of time just listening and hearing what are the needs, what are the requirements immediately, what are long-term goals, what are different things that need to be addressed. But the best people that you can learn that from is from people that are either working in those communities or living in those communities. And we've really positioned ourselves as a listening and learning foundation. And from that, a lot of the big projects that we have in our minds, until we've done the research that needs to be done, the learning, the understanding that needs to be done, we won't be implementing those projects until we fully understand how they can be most beneficial.
Reading through your profile, I saw a statement that says you are changing the narratives of inequality in South Africa, remembering the one by one. Could you unpack that short phrase, because it seems to be so powerful? And yeah.
Yeah, it was created by accident. It was so funny when it was funny, but when we were kind of putting it together, and because now remember we launched the foundation right at the beginning of the pandemic when it hit South Africa. We had a logo that actually was an exact replica of another organization who we now support actually, but another organization's logo. We didn't have a website. We didn't have a team. We just were not set up at all, but we wanted to help and do whatever we could during the pandemic to really just make sure that the people that were most vulnerable were safe. And so remembering the one by one really just came up because coming into this work, it can be super overwhelming. You look at it and changing the narratives of inequality in South Africa is not a small feat or not a small job that we want to do. And so it can be super overwhelming. But then you'll meet, one person along the way. We work with Sislungi, who has 5 different soup kitchens in the Cape Town area. And we were introduced to her early on. And we've walked, over a 2-year journey with her. And what she has been able to do with just the support that we've been able to give as far as food platform fundraising, what she's been able to do has been massive. And she's one individual. And I think often in the NGO space, I think often what looks so overwhelming is there's such a massive job to do. But actually, if you just remember that one individual can make a massive difference, and that individual's story, that individual's purpose, that individual's goal is important and it needs to be addressed. So instead of always having these massive big ideas, just focusing and coming back to that thing of the one. And I think also for the person that sits on the end of not having the resources or the time necessarily to be hands-on involved in the work, but what is your role in that space? And if you can, if you're in a financial position to be giving into work that's happening in South Africa, because there's phenomenal NGOs that are doing phenomenal NGOs, and the foundation's doing incredible work. And if you're in a space that you can be giving, then you're an individual that could change somebody else's life potentially. But also as a giver, sometimes it can be overwhelming because you look at it and you're like, how does my 200 Rand actually impact, South Africa as a whole? And it does have an impact. It's just, people need to remember that their little bit, their, individual contribution matters, and that's important.
Yeah, and I also see that on the way you have been joined by other partners. And would you want to talk a bit about some of the partnerships that you have forged on the way, and also underscoring the point that you have just made, the importance of just one person's contribution goes a long way in addressing some of the vexing challenges that we have. But I'm interested in getting to hear a bit more about the partnerships that you have forged on the way.
Yeah. So, also when we started the foundation, one of our main goals was to work with people that are on the ground in, the communities that we are planning to support and wanting to grow and to work in. And what was very important for us was really partnering up with small NGOs that don't necessarily have the platform that we have and don't necessarily have the reach that we have, but are doing absolutely incredible work. And a small example of this is soup kitchens, right? Because soup kitchens have been supporting millions of South Africans for many, many, many years. And a lot of communities depend on soup kitchens. But I don't believe that soup kitchens have ever been more highlighted than they were in the pandemic. And that's because everyone was focusing on food security, right? So in order for all of us to stay home and be safe from the virus, we all needed to stay home. And for a lot of people, that meant losing jobs, losing income, and not having food. And then, of course, the soup kitchens played a pivotal role in the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And the fact is people were depending on soup kitchens before COVID. People were absolutely depending on soup kitchens during COVID, and people will continue depending on soup kitchens after COVID. And that's just one of the small examples of small NGOs, not small individuals, but individuals that were doing incredible work in communities. And that's where we've found a space where we've been able to support and really tell a lot of the stories that were happening in order to do some fundraising and support for a lot of these organizations that are doing incredible work.
So your foundation was established at the beginning of the pandemic, and obviously we have to talk about the impact that COVID has had on livelihoods, on individuals, but even on institutions, your institution included. So 2 points here. One is, what has been the impact of COVID on yourself, on the work that you do, but also on your foundation? But secondly, what have been the different ways in which you have seen giving happening during this time of need?
Yeah. So to address the first part of that question, I think for everybody, COVID affected us all in our own kind of way. I think what was a blessing for CNI specifically was we had just come off, winning the World Cup, and then early on into 2020, a month before COVID, the first case was found in South Africa. We were in Germany. Sia was along with the Springboks accepting a Laureus Award. And, a month later we're here and we're like, what are we going to do? And I think I can't really speak into how, the pandemic affected our foundation, because the foundation was created from the pandemic, essentially. So we had the intention, we were also very fortunate to be invited. Sia built a bit of a relationship with Roger Federer, and we were invited to his, if you remember, they played a tennis match in Cape Town, and we were invited to his fundraising dinner, where we got to meet Bill Gates and Rafael Nadal, and have some really incredible conversations with them. All of their foundation leaders were at this dinner as well, and I spent a lot of time just really learning from their CEOs and how they do things. And that was really the intention when we knew, okay, we're doing a foundation, but the intention was to really just learn, how do you actually do this? Because we don't know, we've never been in the NGO and foundation space before. So the intention was to really learn and understand. And then we went from that kind of learning phase to now, okay, the pandemic is here. We don't know how it's affecting, people that are living with TB. We don't know how it's affecting with people that are living with sometimes lower immune systems, such as HIV and AIDS. And obviously we have high rates of all of those. And CNI just really wanted to get to work. So we started off with PPE, just supporting Doran Giza was one of the hospitals, and there were a couple others in the Eastern Cape which were severely understocked of PPE, and just what was really amazing for us is we were able to travel over 18,000 kilometers around South Africa by car, and we did a lot of food drops all over South Africa. We visited almost every single location in South Africa. And it was really, really incredible just having conversations on the way. And, being in East London and doing a food drop there and just hearing from, some of the women there, specifically single moms, what were their challenges, what were they dealing with? And then going over to Limpopo and then hearing from them, what were their challenges? And it was surprising to us because very often the same thing was popping up, aside from some people having access to water and others not. But a lot of the issues were very much similar in a lot of the different places that we visited. And then I can't remember the second half of your question.
No, it's fine. I think we can always come back to it. The foundation is less than 5 years old, and so we can't really talk about impact per se, but I think we can talk a bit about some of your successes, but also some of the challenges that you have encountered on the way. and potentially some of the mistakes that you have made in trying to respond from a philanthropic perspective. Can you take us through those?
Yeah. And, I can touch on impact just slightly, because I actually just last week was in a meeting with our CEO, Mahlatsi. It's very important for us, for our foundation, to make an impact. So to not just have these statistics of how many soup kitchens we support, how many food parcels we've dropped, how many gender-based violence organizations we support, how many Power to You packs we've donated. It really is important for us to see fundamental change in our country, and hopefully in our lifetime. But we've actually implemented a process in our foundation called Theory of Change. And that's really just understanding what is it that we want to see changed, and the organizations that we work with, what capacity do they have, what support do they have in order to come alongside us and see, those goals achieved, and how do we measure those things? Because I think that's sometimes overlooked sometimes by foundations and NGOs is, yes, you've given 100 food parcels, but what's changed? What's been the impact of that? And I think those are, the meeting was hard and it was hectic, but it was very important, because it's kind of broadened the way that we're thinking about the work that we're doing. And this is all what I touched on earlier, is really just researching, making sure that we are learning and understanding, like, what is it we wanting to achieve, and how, implementing programs and processes of how we actually going to do that.
So you and Sia are still very young. You are at the height of your careers as a businesswoman yourself, him as a sports person. You could have really chosen to spend your lives, doing this and not getting involved in philanthropy. Why is giving important to both of you?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I read an article last week about how, our garage is full of cars valued at like 20 million rand or something. And I was just like, how ridiculous sometimes people can be, honestly. But, for Sia and I, we absolutely, could be living our best lives and traveling all over the place and doing this and doing that and whatever. But that for us is not what life is about. And this is just a personal, value system that we've set for ourselves. But we just believe that, you're placed on the earth for a purpose. And we believe that our purpose has been kind of revealed through the work of the foundation. Sia often touches on the fact that when he's exhausted and he has to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and it's freezing and it's raining and he has to go run outside, like chasing after a ball, that's the last thing he feels like doing. But then he remembers why he does it, because rugby has given him this incredible platform to be able to do this amazing work. And for me as well, we work with a lot of phenomenal partners, right? And we work with brands like Adidas, Red Bull, and these are all phenomenal brands, Total, brands that are very much willing to see change in South Africa too, and have the resource to see things change in South Africa. And we just feel like what a waste it would be to partner with, such phenomenal brands and not be able to use that to really have an impact on South Africa. So we've tried to be really strategic in the conversations, and pretty much all of the brands that we work with are giving into the foundation in some way, shape, or form. And it's really just expanded the work that we've been able to do. But yeah, I think just most importantly for us is we're not okay. We're not okay that people in South Africa don't have equal opportunities. That's not okay for us. And we also are not comfortable to just sit back and pretend like it's not happening, because it is. And when you have a conversation with an individual, a single mom who is raising, 2 boys and wants to send them on school tours and wants them to have an opportunity to be cited in a sport that they love, or a extramural that they love, or a music that they love, but they don't have the same access that a Model C school will have, that's not okay for us. So, you know, there's just a number of things that I think just don't sit well with us. And we just would rather spend our time, our extra time that we do have outside of family and work, focusing on how we can build a legacy and make an impact in the country that we so love.
So another area of interest for us is the role that sports personalities play, and given Sia's role and position in society currently, he has a huge following, and especially among young people, but across sectors, across races. Beyond the financial giving that your foundation is involved in, what are the other non-financial forms of giving that you can speak to, especially as his role and position in society is concerned? But also, I'm interested to know whether there's been any influence of some sort by his giving on some of his fellow, I would say, sports personalities in the country.
So that's an interesting question. I think, you know, outside of financial giving, time is, you know, more important than money will ever be. And time is so valuable that it's something that you can never get back. You know, once it's gone, it's gone. And what you've done with your time is, you know, you've got to live with that. But I think time is right up above finances, and that's something that Sia, you know, is very limited with. I mean, currently he was supposed to be here with us this evening, but he's in Ireland at the moment. And just on Saturday, we were at his school in Gqeberha at the renaming of the field, which is now the Kolisi field, which was the most phenomenal occasion. But straight after that, he's rushing off to the airport to get back for training, and then on a plane on the way to Ireland. So his time is so extremely limited at the moment. But we have a vision that, you know, once our professional lives kind of start slowing down a little bit, we will have a little bit more time to work on the things in the foundation. That's one. And then another one, I think, for us is the fact that the Kolisi brand gives a lot of opportunities. You know, the partnership that we work with some of the NGOs, it has a lot of pull for them to be able to do their own kind of advertising, if you will. And then, of course, the platform that they are able to work from as well. And something else that was very important to us that I do believe is a good resource as well is networking. So last week as well, I was in one of our Kolisi Connect networks, which is really a space that we've created for organizations that are all working in the gender-based violence sector, but all kind of working on their own little parts of it, and some working on very similar projects. But we just found that there was such a gap with NGOs and foundations where they just weren't connecting. And so they couldn't say, hey, I'm working on this, you working on that. How can we partner up and make sure that we, you know, tackle this thing from every angle? And we've got close to 20 organizations that have now joined the Kolisi Connect, and it's something that we put on and create a space for these organizations to connect. And it's absolutely mind-blowing what you'll see happen within 2 hours. You know, some organizations specialize in ECD, early development training for teachers. And then you've got Grace, who's another one of our partners, Grace, who's just opened an ECD school in Zola Township. And she's desperate for training, but has no idea where to even start. And then the two of them have connected and are now doing phenomenal work at Grace's ECD Center. So connection for us has been so important. And, you know, as far as other, you know, sportsmen and women get involved, I think it can't be really, you can't single out any kind of individual or whatever job they do. Ultimately, if you live in this country, you know there's a problem, and every individual has a responsibility to respond to the problem. So no matter what your job is or what you do, I think that it's just important that you find yourself in a space where you are supporting an organization of some sort that are doing work to build this country and make it a better place.
So I also see that let me say we live in the age of technology, digital platforms, social media, and I want to get a sense on how you are using these new technologies to advance the causes that you care about. But you were also talking about this incredible opportunity and platform for networking that you have established. And I think this was a good segue for us to talking about the use of technology to advancing what you care about.
Yeah. No, and you know, as far as using technology in this day and age, I think the biggest question and the first place to start is who's got access to that technology and who's able to use it for their benefit and their growth and for their education, you know. And I think that's firstly a big question, and also something that we are, you know, looking at addressing long term. But I think it's the day and age that we live in. You know, everything is on social media. That's where, you know, a lot of people are doing their work and their space. And I just think that we live in a time where social media can sometimes be flooded with absolute rubbish. And I mean, TikTok, for example, you know, you can spend hours on there getting lost at videos, you know, that are sometimes funny, but also sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, what am I doing here? Um, it just like completely smashes your brain. There's nothing really there that, you know, can impact you and grow you. And I think again, there's a responsibility that's held with C and I both use our social media, private social media platforms for our own gain, but to also start putting stuff out there that could potentially educate and could potentially change thinking. So that's something, you know, in this theory of change meeting that we had last week was something that we're planning on really addressing is how do people feel and think about giving into organizations and understanding their responsibility in that in a South African context. So, you know, if you are sitting in a financial position where you're able to give to an organization quite significantly monthly, we want to create content that is helping you understand and learn that actually that's your responsibility, but also it's really going to make a massive impact. So how people look at, you know, giving and kind of understanding how there's a number of things that are going to be addressed in that conversation, but something that we believe is really important is really how people feel and understand their responsibility of giving.
And so as we get closer to the end of our conversation, I'm interested to know, I mean, your foundation is still very young. You mentioned that you spent a bit of time at some point listening to some of the leaders of foundations, like leaders of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I'm assuming there are also some foundations here in South Africa that you've been working with, learning from. Last year, I think we saw you at the PASA Symposium. So what have you learned so far as a new foundation, but also as young philanthropists? I mean, philanthropy usually is associated with elderly people, but here we see young people who are interested in giving and doing it in an effective manner. So I'm interested in knowing what have been the lessons that you have managed to benefit from some of your associations or some of the collaborations with some of the experienced philanthropists and leaders in the country?
It's another really good question. You know, thinking about the fact that C and I are young and also that we never worked in the foundation space is something that's actually a really good conversation and something that we should potentially reflect on more even. But you know, it's the same as learning from organizations, or not the same, but similar as learning from organizations that are, you know, in communities and working on the ground, not necessarily with a massive platform, but are still doing phenomenal work. It's the same kind of idea for us learning from organizations that have been around and are very successful for years and years and years. I think one specifically that we've really had the privilege of working very closely with is the Wilderness Foundation. They work a lot more in conservation. But Andrew Muir has been a part of, I mean, he's done some phenomenal work in South Africa, all the way back to the apartheid days, and some of the things that he was doing, you know, all the way back then, it's mind-blowing. But we've been so fortunate to really learn from him, and he's actually on our board, and he's been extremely successful in not only, you know, policy changes, but in massive work in the South African in South Africa, and in addressing many different issues, you know, in obviously within context of where they work, but we've been able to learn so much from him. And the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates is actually a South African, and absolutely phenomenal what we've been able to understand and learn, you know, from them as well. I follow Melinda very closely. I've never had the privilege of meeting her, but it is one of my biggest dreams. And you know, there's absolutely amazing foundations doing incredible work, and we always place ourselves in a position of wanting to learn and understand.
So maybe let's end by going back to the beginning, when you established the foundation. In the next 5 to 10 years, what do you hope to see? What do you hope to achieve?
Sure. You know, I think it's also a very hard question. In the next 5 to 10 years, what do we hope to see, and what do we hope to have achieved? And this is really the intention of the meeting that we had just last week about the theory of change. What is it that we want to see, and how realistic is it actually? One of Sia's biggest dreams and desires is, you know, his transition from Zwide and from Msingeni Primary into Grey High School. He always talks about that journey being 15 minutes apart, but worlds apart in opportunity and in access. And one of his biggest dreams that he's always shared with me is to build a Model C school to that caliber in townships, and to stop this, you know, this idea that children need to be removed from their community and from their homes in order to receive opportunity and equal access. So that's one of his biggest dreams. We are obviously very far from that, and I'm very much mapping out what would that actually look like, and how possible is it actually. But yeah, I think the fact that children are still, you know, being removed from home in order to gain opportunity and access to things is just absolutely crazy. So that's a big dream, and probably something that I would say is closer to the 10 and 20 year mark, but it is a desire that we want to see happen. But over the next 5 years, it's really spending a lot of time learning. We also are on a mission to grow an endowment to make sure that we are a sustainable organization, and can kind of work you know, off of the endowment, and fund off of that. And then potentially in future policy changes. You know, we also obviously find ourselves in a position of influence, and we want to use that for systematic change and for potential policy change. So potentially that's something that we would, you know, like to go into in future as well.
Rachel, thank you very much for firstly taking the initiative to establish the foundation. Thank you for the work that you and Sia are doing in bridging the divide that exists, especially between the haves and have-nots, when it comes to issues of access, whether it's to education, healthcare, and other opportunities that we have to contend with. Thank you very much. That was Rachel Kolisi, the co-founder of the Kolisi Foundation. Thank you for watching.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, talking all things philanthropy.